All right. Hopefully you guys are doing good tonight. It's really good to see you here. Always appreciate you taking the time to join me in the live classes, even though it's not mandatory. You can always catch the archive later if need be, but it's good to have you here live so you can ask questions and have a little bit of dialogue. So we are in week 2, and I am catching up on grading. I have posted feedback for the week 1 Photoshop practice, and I'm about halfway through the week 1 projects. So look for those to be finished up tomorrow. Overall, what I'm seeing so far is very good. I'm really pleased with that. As far as comments, like global comments, I would say one thing to keep in mind is that the mood board is not a product in itself. It isn't the end deliverable. It is a planning tool, and it's a brainstorming tool. So right now you're just forming ideas with the mood board. And then those will inform your design once we get to week 4. We're doing this in a very drawn out manner. So in practice, you might sit down one day and come up with ideas, use a mood board to throw out ideas and really let that take shape. Since we're covering topics one at a time, we're kind of drawing this out over 4 weeks. So we're adding to it week by week, each little component. And I did see that a few of you are already thinking about typography, already thinking about color schemes, and that's really great. Don't feel too settled on those things, since we are going to discuss those more over the next couple of weeks. In fact, tonight is color. So it's good that you're thinking in terms of those things, but see how it shapes up once we get into some of these topics a little more formally. You might have some different ideas based on some of the formal guidelines. And typically I like to have the exploration activities graded by the time we come to lecture, but with the difference in schedule, of course, that's due tonight, and I don't have it available to talk about. But on the other hand, having some of this material tonight under your belt will help inform that as you complete that exercise. Are there any questions or any concerns or anything you wanted to mention at this time? No? Okay. Everything is all right. That's good to hear. And as always, you're welcome to open up your microphones as we go to ask questions, or you can type in the chat area as well. I will be monitoring that too. So we are talking about color this week, and it's a very big topic. We are going to get through the fundamentals of color theory and some color psychology. Color theory is the formal study of how colors interact with one another. How, if you were studying painting, this would inform your color mixing to get specific color hues that you want to use in a painting. And it applies really across the board. This is something that has been developed over centuries by visual artists and people who study light and optics. And so pretty well established ideas, and it's applied in fine arts, whether it's painting, mixing inks for printing, mixing colors for display on a computer monitor, and even in movies. And then the other side of that is color psychology, which is the more emotional, more symbolic meanings of colors. And a lot of that is based on the on culture, on the culture that you were raised within, and some of the meanings that are associated with colors. And in some very rare cases, it is very innate with us, things that are instinctual, like the color red being a symbol of harm or danger because it's associated with our color of our blood and so forth. So it's things that that are just kind of hardwired in us as survival mechanisms. Have you guys worked at all with the color wheel? Are you familiar with the color wheel? If you've ever taken an art class? Okay, so both of you have seen this before, and just as sort of a quick refresher, it is arranged in a way that the colors progress in a spectrum. Colors that are similar to one another are adjacent, and those that are very different are opposites. This is actually, and I don't want to get too much into this because it's very technical, but it's actually based on how our eyes perceive color. Some of that is in your textbook readings, but our eyes contain the color receptors, the rods and cones, that can only detect certain wavelengths of light, and so these colors basically compete for attention from those receptors in very simplified terms. And so the colors that you see opposites on the color wheel are those that kind of cancel each other out and compete for the same receptors. As a result of that, they have really high contrast and kind of create a vibration or a little bit of a jarring effect when you see those two together. And I'll get into more of that later. But just know that this is laid out in a way that takes our perception of color into account. Some quick terminology. A color, what we just casually refer to as a color, is a color hue, and that's a pure color. So yellow or green or red. It could also mean orange red or any of those secondary and tertiary colors. The word shade refers to a darker variety of that color hue. So darker versions of yellow or darker versions of green. If you're mixing paint, a shade would be the, the color you get when you mix a little bit of black paint with that color hue. And then a tint is the opposite. It's the lighter variety of that color. So basically what pink is to red, if you mix a little bit of white paint into that, you would get the tint. And a lot of times we use these terms interchangeably in casual conversation, but they actually have very specific meanings when it comes to formal color theory. So if you hear me use those, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to be too nitpicky about this in your writing, because I'll usually know what you're talking about. But if you're ever working with any graphic artists or other kind of visual artists, you might want to get these down so that they don't give you funny looks. And very importantly, color is divided into warm and cool colors. The color wheel is split roughly down the middle in this way. And warm colors are those that remind us of warmth, of fire, of heat. Okay, Maria, I'll see you back in a minute. And cool colors are those that are similar to ice or water or coolness. And this is very important, thinking back about the color wheel and how the color receptors compete for these color wavelengths. When you pair a warm and a cool color together, you get a lot of energy, of kind of dynamic contrast. Whereas if you paired cool colors together, they're more harmonious, they're more calm. And the same with multiple warm colors. There's not a lot of conflict. Cool colors are more subdued, energetically, as well as in terms of mood, whereas warm colors are more upbeat and energetic. And visually, and this is interesting, if you see these colors used in a painting or any other kind of visual media, warm colors will tend to pop forward. They look like they're closer to you, whereas cool colors appear to recede away. And you can use this effect to create a sense of depth or emphasis. So this is all sort of some fundamentals, and then I'll get into more of how significant this is as we go. Any questions so far? That's all pretty straightforward, I think. And within formal color theory, artists have developed a set of basic color relationships that are just an easy reference for them to pull out particular color schemes that they know know the kind of energy that these will create, or the kind of visual impression that these will create. The most basic of these is monochromatic. And if you think about what that word means, mono meaning single or one, and chroma is color, so monochromatic means one color. So now you're using tints and shades of a single hue. No other color, just a single hue of color with different tints and shades, so lighter and darker varieties. And this painting is by Pablo Picasso, and you can see how even though he's only using blue, you still get a sense of shape and depth and contours. But since it's only one color, you don't have a lot of diversity, a lot of color richness. It can be clean and elegant, but doesn't have the benefit of the potential for contrast and visual interest that more color-rich compositions can have. Here's some examples, more modern examples. One movie poster and one logo design. Both of these are monochromatic, cool colors. And monochromatic cool colors would be more calm, whereas monochromatic warm colors are more energetic and more active. And you see how that matches the themes in the two movie posters. But very rarely will we be working with only one color. Instead, we'll have usually at least two, but usually multiple colors. And so it's important to know how those colors will react to one another in order to create the type of impression that we're going for, the kind of visual impression, the kind of emotional impression that we want. Those colors that are opposite, as I said, that compete with one another are called complementary. And this is important to remember, these two color schemes, because complementary is often misinterpreted as just meaning that they pair well together, or they look pretty together, but it actually specifically refers to colors that are opposites. So blue and orange is a very common complementary pair, or red and green, yellow and violet, and so on. Those colors that are next to each other are called analogous, which means similar. Complementary colors are used when you want a very dynamic and exciting feel, that you want to kind of add some intensity. A lot of times action movies will make use of this in their movie posters, which is something you'll be exploring in your exploration activity. Whereas analogous colors are more subdued, more calm and mellow, and you see these in a lot of romantic films and more emotional films for their movie posters. Some examples: analogous colors with a painting by Monet, and you can see how all the colors, while there's a diversity of colors, they're all very similar to one another. They're all sort of in that green-blue area, even going to greenish yellow. And almost the same color scheme in more modern examples. You see how it's not really action-oriented. There isn't a lot of really upbeat excitement. It's the Bugs Life poster is fun because of the imagery, but the color isn't adding a lot of dynamic excitement to it. And BP has a very similar scheme. And you see the difference between the analogous cool colors and analogous warm colors. There's a little bit more energy here, but it's still very harmonious and complementary. So now you see there's that really stark contrast, and it helps to call attention to this central location and adds a sense of warmth to the cafe scene lets it pop forward. Remember that visual effect where the warm colors pop forward while the cool colors recede back. So pairing those two allows this specific part of the painting to become the focal point and gives it a little bit more sense of life. And there's the movie poster and logo examples, and you see that. This is usually used when there is some a feeling of action intended, or if you just want to have a really upbeat and fun impression. So those are the two color schemes I really want to emphasize: analogous, complementary. If you remember those two, you can really infer almost any color scheme. You can figure out exactly how it's going to affect your audience and your viewer. There's another one that I just want to touch on, and that's achromatic, sometimes called neutral colors. Achromatic means there is no color. That's black and white. Black and white are not considered colors in formal color theory. They are pure value, which means lightness and darkness. So that you can create compositions that are achromatic, but they lack the benefit of the color relationships that we've been studying. They can still be visually interesting. They tend to be lower in energy, are often described as depressed, although they can be very elegant as well, as the MC Escher illustration shows. But very often you will see this used to create a more serious look, a more grim or suspenseful appearance, as we have with Batman. And a common trick is to add an accent color. And that's something you're going to be doing this week with your Photoshop practice, but that is taking the color out of an image, but then adding one single splash of color on an object that you want to emphasize, you want to call attention to, add a sense of emotion or drama, or just to make that eye-catching. This is from the movie Schindler's List, which was in black and white until you see the little girl in her coat. All right, so are there any questions about complementary colors or analogous colors? And I kind of sped through those. I know it was covered in the Linda lesson, so I don't want to be too redundant, but just wanted to make sure that was touched on before I get into more of the main meat of tonight's presentation. All right. In terms of our purposes as media professionals, color can be really applied in two basic ways. One is as a method for branding, to create a brand identity. And it's a very important part of brand recognition. And the other use of color is in storytelling, which we've been talking about from week one. And color, as we'll see, much like a musical score, is used to kind of set the tone and the emotional feel of a particular scene. And both of these instances make use of the same rules of color theory, so analogous and complementary colors, as well as achromatic and the rest, as well as more or less the same ideas of color psychology, those colors that are meaningful to us based on our culture. Here's some examples. These are pretty recognizable brands, right? But look what happens when you swap the colors. It just gives you sort of your brain kind of pauses for a moment, thinking something's not right here. And that's how fundamental these colors are to us in recognizing those brands. And here again, it just is like, well, that's not the UPS I know. And So this is just a quick demonstration, but it's not just the symbols or the words that drive our brand recognition. It is on a very fundamental level color as well, because that brown and gold is very fundamental to the UPS identity. They actually use that as part of their marketing, emphasizing that recognition of color. And FedEx with the blue and orange, and I believe they have a different color scheme between FedEx Ground and FedEx Air, but it's all part of their identity. So they have 4 different. Okay, so it's differentiating between each tier in their organization. And this is something that any organization has. They establish these colors and they keep it consistent because, as we saw, any deviation from that takes away from the recognition, the familiarity. And you want your brand to be familiar. You want it to be something that is comfortable to your customers and your audience, and easily recognized. Oh, there's actually, okay, FedEx has 5 different ones. So, but what will happen is there will be a document somewhere within that organization, and it's a style guide, and it will have these colors codified, just like you're going to do with your mood board, along with the color codes and specific uses for those colors. So if we were to come across the FedEx style guide, we could scroll through the pages and come upon those 5 different color schemes in a very formal way, with all of the color codes provided so that they can be reproduced exactly. Rather than you're trying to come close, you put in a color code into Photoshop or any of the design software, and it will recreate that color precisely. This is actually from the Full Sail Style Guide. And there you go. You actually have found it. This graphic I actually took from the Full Sail Style Guide. They didn't want me putting the color codes in there, but understandably. But these are the colors that you will see in any Full Sail branding. It's that kind of burnt orange. It looks like olive green. I'm told it's actually a dark shade of yellow, but it appears green to our eyes. And then a secondary color is the metallic silver gray that is very rarely used, but you see it occasionally in presentations, particularly the graduation ceremony. So you see those represented right there in the logo for Full Sail. It's on the business cards. It's on a lot of the stationery. I use it in my slides, same color scheme. So it's not a coincidence. And in your mood board template, just to sort of practice what I'm preaching. And if you look at documents like the course catalog, you'll see those colors again. So this isn't just a logo thing. This is a complete brand identity. So any kind of publications, any kind of commercials, any other kind of media, you will see these colors represented either in the words, in the symbols, the design, whether it's the background color and so forth. Here we see a title page from the course catalog, and the orange is used not only in the title but also to highlight the page number. It helps to call attention to that location. And if you flip through the book, you'll see that these colors are used for headings throughout, as well as any kind of specific important details that they want to emphasize. And it maintains that recognition, maintains that familiarity. You know that you're looking at, in that case, a Full Sail document. It would be the same if you were looking at a FedEx publication or even their trucks. The Linda lesson presented something like this, and you'll see this really often, and that's this sort of codified table or reference of what each color means in terms of the emotions and how that applies to logos. It's really not this cut and dry. You can't just sort of use a formula and say, I want my viewers to feel excitement and therefore I will use red. This is kind of typical associations of these colors. Doesn't always have to be the case. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of the primary colors, which would be blue, red, and yellow, are used with brands that are more traditional or more formal. So even looking at this infographic, yellow is Nikon, IMDb, CAT, which is construction materials, Sprint, and Best Buy, and DHL. Same with red, Exxon, CNN, a lot of these very more business-like organizations, and blue. And then the farther you deviate from those primary colors, getting into secondary colors like violet or green, then you get to kind of a little bit more quirky personalities. So this is just sort of an observation I've made, but see, one especially violet and purple is a very artsy or quirky color, and you get Barbie and the Sci-Fi Channel, or some other ones, Cadbury, well, Taco Bell, which seems odd, but there it is. And it's not a hard and fast rule because you still have T-Mobile in that category, Orkut and Lynx. But it is a trend. One rule of thumb I've heard is for picking colors for your brand is to pick something that sets you apart. If you think about FedEx and UPS, they don't have remotely similar color schemes, but they probably want the same kind of impression from their audience, from their customers, which is dependability and good service and so forth. So obviously the colors aren't communicating that. The colors instead are trying to create a unique identity and personality. So what's recommended often is if you have competitors in the industry, don't imitate their colors. Do something that's unique and sets you apart. That is different and recognizable. Some of these I do think are valid, and I won't say that you should completely disregard this, but just kind of take it as a very informal guide, like blue in particular, dependability and strength. It's often an authority, a color of authority, and we think about the police. They wear the blue uniforms, and that's seen as an authority figure, or military uniforms, and so, or even formal suits will often be in the navy blue. So it is seen as a very formal, dependable, and trustworthy color. So that's perfectly valid if you want to create that kind of impression. And you can see this represented in some of these really well-known logos. For example, why do you think BP has that green logo? You think it's just the colors that they happen to prefer, or is there a very strategic purpose for that? Okay, so and what do you think their line of thought is in picking um, tints and shades of green, considering the kind of business that they are in?
Okay, let me unmute myself because I'm typing here, and
Sure.
it's better to talk. All right. I guess they want to demonstrate a greener, company, even though they're not
Hmm.
that greener. Just like subconsciousness, like to the customer itself, we're greener. So it's
Yeah.
more strategic, from that point of view.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And even looking at the words that you just used, you said they use it because they want to appear greener. And that's not a literal sense of the color, but we use the term green to talk about environmental friendliness and ecological friendliness. And so from a public image standpoint, using that green color, and not only the green color, but the very organic shape that looks like a flower. Um,
Exactly. So they use the flower to green, and then the green, so it's like everything goes together to appear greener.
mhm. So regardless of what their actual track record is, as far as environmental um, initiatives and so forth, and their own practices, that's the image that they are going for by putting that public uh, facing logo and brand identity out there. So, as you're looking at these things, you can really start kind of taking these things apart. Intel being a company that produces computer components has that very business-like color scheme. And then Firefox has that complementary color scheme, blue and orange, which gives them a more upbeat and fun look. And taking a look at Burger King here, and as I've been saying, it's not just logos. This is the Burger King logo, which is really well recognized. And since they have those recognizable colors, they're used across the board. This is an advertisement. And this advertisement uses those colors, the red, the gold. Um, but this is also imitating the signage that you would see in the stores and the packaging that you would see with the products. So it's that consistency, and that's what you want to go for when you're creating a brand is consistency and recognizability. Yeah, I'm pretty much ready for dinner as well. And even websites, and this is a strong complementary color pair. So obviously that would tell me that this company is going for something a little more energetic. And in fact, they take a very lighthearted approach to their presentation. If you look at some of the copy on the website, it says, seriously, these days everyone and their mom has a website. And so they're obviously very tongue in cheek. And the exciting and dynamic contrast between those colors helps to boost that feeling. Whereas if you wanted something very formal and businesslike, you could use an analogous blues or something along those lines. It would be much more reserved. Are there any thoughts on color as far as branding? Any questions or ideas? Any thoughts on what colors might play a part in your own personal um, brand identity as we're developing that? So color can be used to create symbolic impressions and used in signage, as we saw. It can also be used in subtle ways to influence story and narrative. taking a look at this ad design, how do you see color being used to reinforce the themes and visual impressions that they are going for?
Well, they use red heavily, in this case, they're using the red as a passion color, not as a, something that is actually in danger.
Right?
Um, this is just to rekindle that flame for that specific brand. The Renault, brand that's actually really famous in Europe, especially in England. So
Mm-hmm.
they're using it as a passion color itself.
Yeah, you see the verbal component where they say the flame of desire, and there's two connections right there. Flame, which is one which connects with the warm color, and then desire being passion, like you said. If you think about Valentine's Day and all the red that's associated with love and passion and desire, then it's a logical color to pick there, right? And goes right along with the red car as well.
True.
And that idea of using color to reinforce the themes and the emotion is something that is a fundamental part of media creation. This graphic that I have up here is based on the TV series Breaking Bad. And if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, there's going to be some spoilers in this section. So just to warn you, I'll try to keep it minor spoilers. What this graphic does is it goes through each episode of each season of the entire series of Breaking Bad and records the colors associated with each character, the major characters, in those episodes. So this might be the color clothes they're wearing, the room they're in, the decor, the car they're driving, something signifying the color associated with that character. So insane amount of work done right here. Um, but the point is that none of this is by chance. There's somebody picking exactly what shirt Walter White is going to wear in a given scene, or where what color scheme is in the living room that where we see Skylar White. This is all very carefully planned and picked by the director, by the colorists, um, in order to create the specific impression they're going for the viewer. And I compare this to a musical score, and it's not that dissimilar. It's simply the visual score in a sense. Let's take a look at the character of Jesse Pinkman. Yeah, it is kind of subliminal. And have you watched any of Breaking Bad? Are you familiar with the show? Okay, so you know about Jesse Pinkman, and he's sort of that very hot-headed character, and he just kind of has emotional outbursts and colorful language pretty often. And looking at his timeline here, it looks pretty appropriate, right? You see a lot of those warm colors in there that would go right along with somebody that has that kind of hot temper. A lot of red, a lot of yellow, but interspersed with some areas that are a little less colorful. And then if we take a look at the key to see where what events are happening in each place, you'll see that there's a correlation between the colors and the events. So right here at point number 3, at the end of season 1, you see Jesse go from this spurt of red to sudden change to black. So all the color is gone. What happens at that point? He's abducted by Tuco. As you remember, Tuco's a bad guy. He's not a pleasant person to be around. So it's possible, and I can't remember now the actual events at this point, but it's possible that he's locked in the trunk of a car or in a dark room or something, having been abducted. So there is no color there. He's in the dark, and that creates a specific impression, sense of hopelessness perhaps, or maybe it really is the color of the clothing he's wearing, but it still is going for that impression of being in a dark spot. Things are looking pretty bad for him. Another example I like to point out is down here at point 5. So again, you see, obviously things have gotten better. He's back to his old self. There's a lot of red. And if I recall, this is at this point they've been making a lot of money on their drug trade, and he's kind of partying a lot. So there's all this red that's sort of more upbeat, exciting, and passionate, as we saw. But then suddenly, again, color goes away. At that point is where Jane dies. Remember that scene? And so the color very literally drains out of his life at that point. And it goes from that gray-green to black and white and gray, so totally colorless at that point. And that's the point where he's in rehab. So it's kind of underscoring that series of events as things go from sort of a point where he's become very hedonistic to kind of the bottom drops out and he is suddenly at a low point. And reading this quote down here in the corner where it says, I want to do the color timing for each of these episodes, where you sit with the colorist and make sure that the colors, each individual scene is just the way you want it. That is by Vince Gilligan, who is the creator of the show. And so it tells you that nothing is left to chance. That's my mantra throughout the course. Nothing is left to chance, including the colors of every single detail. And this is true in nearly any medium you work with, especially film and television, but anywhere else as well. Here's a movie poster, and this uses complementary colors of orange and blue. Notice how the colors are associated, though. That subdued blue, cool color is associated with Jason Bateman, who's struggling with these toddlers, and he looks not so happy. The expression on his face. And that goes back to last week when I talked about facial expressions. They communicate to the viewer. They tell us, we internalize that feeling of discomfort or unhappiness. And the blue underscores that. And then Ryan Reynolds with the two young ladies is associated with the orange, which is the upbeat, warm color. So it just reinforces that feeling that we see represented in the imagery. There's a really good example out there, and you can find this on YouTube, of the use of color in the movie Black Hawk Down. They alternate between a very warm cast to everything, it's orange, or a very cool cast to everything. So they literally filter the footage through a warm or cool color filter. When it's looking orange, it signifies that they are in danger, that they're in this hazardous environment. Whereas when they finally get back to their base, suddenly it shifts and the scene takes on this blue cast. And it's, as you said, a very subliminal almost cue to the viewer. And that's also used here in The Matrix. As you said, that is The Matrix, yeah. And so this is not Black Hawk Down. But in The Matrix, you have a number of different settings that they end up going into. And again, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen The Matrix, then first of all, shame on you. But also I'm about to give away a few secrets. Most of The Matrix takes place in artificial world, right? It's simulated in the computer. And when they're in that setting in the Matrix, the world of the Matrix, everything looks kind of unnatural, right? But it's in a very subtle way. So if you're watching that movie for the first time, you don't really know what's happening, what the premise is, but it has an odd look. You notice that things just don't quite look right. And this still here really illustrates that, because you notice that green cast to everything, including Morpheus's skin tone, and that's not something we see in nature. It gives that sort of slightly otherworldly feel. So it's meant to be something you can't quite put your finger on, but you know that something's not quite right. But what do we see once they get out of the Matrix and they go into what is the quote real world in the movies, which is that post-apocalyptic setting? Then we see the more natural colors, right? So there they are in what is Zion, the human city where they've been fighting the robots, or the machines. So now we have natural colors. We have warm colors. We have the oranges and the yellows and the browns, so the skin tones that we know and we are comfortable with. So it's that psychological cue. Now things are different. Now things are alive. This is the real world. And in particular, this scene, they've been celebrating sort of the celebrating before the big battle coming up, and so they're all very sweaty and worked up anyway, so the colors are even more intense. And then there's a third setting, though. What happens when they leave Zion, the safety of Zion, and go out into the ruins of the world? Yeah, it's very dark. It's destruction. It's lifeless. It's meant to be cold and uncaring and unfeeling. So they're in these ships flying around through the wreckage of the world, and it's just dark grays and blues, um, and just feels cold. It's those cool colors. So it feels cold, and it's meant to feel cold. You are meant to feel like you are very isolated and very, in a very unforgiving place. So it's those subtle mental cues that change your point of view and change the feel. Another thing that can be done with color is to direct your attention, to create emphasis. And this is done usually through the use of complementary colors, because remember, complementary colors have that strong contrast. So if you have, and this is from Crimson Peak, if you have a scene that is mostly cool colors and creates that eerie feeling, and then you throw a splash of a warm color in there, complementary color, that's what's going to grab attention, is that thing that's different, especially warm colors, because they jump out at you. So here the girl's face becomes our focal point, along with the candles, but really meant to draw your eye to this point. And of course, even the shapes kind of pull us in due to the perspective, but that really pops, right? You can't help but see and focus on her face. This technique here is used for a very dramatic effect, but that same idea is used in newscasts. If you look at your evening news, the background is almost always cool colors. Sometimes it's an image of a city skyline. Sometimes it looks like there's like a control room back there, but it's always a blue, because every natural skin tone is a warm color. And so we'll contrast with that color, and making that talking head, that anchor man, that reporter, the focal point. And they stand out to you. And here again, complementary colors, green and red. Not left to chance. This green background at Hogwarts was very strategically placed there, because Harry Potter's Gryffindor colors are going to stand out against that. he's going to always be where our eye is drawn because of that. Even notice that the towers are sort of a yellow-green so that they won't take away from Harry Potter as our focal point. Even though in this he would be moving, very rapidly, flying on his broom. And then Draco Malfoy, as it happens, is in his Slytherin green colors. So even though he's closer to us and larger, he doesn't take away the attention because he blends in. It's the complementary color, that red against the green, that attracts our eye. It's a really useful technique, similar to what we saw with the achromatic colors, where you throw a splash of color on there. Same effect. It's going to draw your attention. We're naturally cued to look for the break in the pattern, the thing that's different. And so if you use these complementary colors in this way, you will know where your viewer's eyes are going to be directed. So this is something to think about this week with your Photoshop practice. And that's meant to be practice, but think about what the background colors are and how you can make a particular object stand out more, by referring to your color wheel and using those complements. Or if the opposite is true, if you want to have a more calm and serene feel, then change the colors a little bit to have them match up. So it's less contrasting, less harsh. And then in your mood board activities, you have a couple of things to consider. Right now, we are building your brand identity. So you're going to pick your brand colors. But then in week 4, when you actually create your design, you also want to have storytelling involved. So then the image is important and the colors in that image, not just the brand elements, but the setting. And you can use Photoshop to change that or enhance that so that you're not limited to what already exists. You can create the impression that you want. And so your brand colors will be separated from the storytelling colors because your brand colors will be things like your text or your logos, whereas the storytelling colors are those that are in the image itself and what kind of impression you create with that image. Any questions or thoughts or comments? Okay, all good. So let's take a look at this one as one last quick example. Talk about the use of color in this case. What do you see as far as how color is used, and how does it reinforce or support the themes and the message of this advertisement? And notice that the tagline is "out of the hospital" doesn't mean out of the woods. Considering what that phrase "out of the woods" usually signifies.
Well, they actually use the cool colors here, but then they use like warm colors behind it, meaning that even though he's out of the hospital, doesn't mean that he's actually, safe.
Yeah.
So by using the cool colors and using the woods, that element, is like unsafe matter.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it's like if you actually go to the hospital, that means that you go to warm colors, and it's like you should be okay.
Okay.
That's my.
Yeah, it's not unlike what we saw with the Matrix, right? With when they're in that very unhealthy environment, the cool colors create a very cold feel.
Yeah.
And here,
Unsafe.
sitting in these, very creepy-looking woods, and it's that ghostly blue light. It looks like it's coming from the TV, but it gives him a very unhealthy pallor, right?
Yep.
So it tells he's kind of building that idea, not out of the woods. He's not really healthy yet. He's not necessarily out of danger. And that contrast with the warm colors is important, right? Because this is what we call this space. It would be a living room, right? And so it's where life happens. So the
Hmm.
colors in there are warm. The leather is orange. Even the carpet has a bit of a warm hue. The kitchen has all these bright yellows. So you get the sense that this is a place where life happens, and yet he's still in this ghostly light. So he has that unhealthy look. So it really makes that stand out. So really, very deliberately planned and implemented use of color there. Okay, so that's something I want to see you experiment with on Thursday when you get into the Photoshop practice this week. I don't have specific rules as far as what colors you have to use, just that you're going to manipulate colors in a photograph, but see how you can apply these ideas of, making colors more complementary, so more different in order to build a more uh, exciting or energetic look, or change the colors to be more similar in order to create a more calm or subdued or gentle look, and see what you can do with that. And then start thinking about how the same ideas might affect your brand identity, how you can match the personality that you want to present as a professional through the use of your color choices. All right, so that is my presentation for tonight. And I suspect you're probably all set, but are there any other questions about this material or anything else happening in the class?
No, everything good.
Very good, excellent. Well, if you are all set, then I will let you go for the evening. I appreciate you bearing with me tonight. It's sort of a private class for you.
Well, have a great night.
You
Enjoy
too.
your day.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye.